Welcome to the Season 1 Heaven Burns Red game guide helped by Heaven Burns Red. A quick disclosure before the actual guide is that most of the information used for this video is taken from Tojo files by Bakasa and Serif database by Rem, both of which are long-time veteran JP players who have made a lot of information easily accessible and translated in English. I'll be leaving links to both Tojo files and Serif database in the description, and I would highly recommend using both resources as they are highly detailed and provide a lot of information that won't be covered in the video itself. Moving on to the actual guide, I'll be talking about 3 topics which all revolve around bossing, more specifically score challenge. Starting with elemental team guides before going into depth and breaking down the damage calculations before giving some advice on ways to improve score challenge scores. Starting with elemental team guides. For base, there will always be 4 slots which are going to be fixed. These are going to be your main buffer, Ingxia S or SS style, an AoE healer and your main DPS. The main DPS is pretty obvious and would vary depending on which element you are deciding to build towards. As long as their EX skill is that of that element, they will work as main DPS in the specific element that you are building. However, there are 3 things to take note of. First is to make sure that for single bosses, make sure that your main DPS is a single target dealer. The max damage cap for single target skills is higher than AoE damage skills, so in the final damage calculation, it would add more damage. Secondly is HP or DP effectiveness. For the most part, HP effectiveness is recommended as bosses usually have more HP than DP, and therefore the extra HP effectiveness would provide better damage overall. Thirdly would be the hit count. As damage doesn't overflow from DP break to HP damage, DPS units like Yurina with only a single hit should only be used after the DP is broken, if not the damage would be wasted. For AoE healer, the main role is just to keep the team alive until all the necessary buffs and overdrive setup is completed. There are many potential options for the AoE healer slot, but as long as they can do full party or frontline heals, that will be enough for the team. Next, the role of the main buffer is to provide skill enhancement buffs. However, do note that skill enhancement buffs are actually not all equal, and those which are provided from EX skills and enhancement skills with demerits usually have a higher potency. If you don't know which is higher, you can always test it by stacking buffs over the limit of 2, and the stronger buffs will always be used. The characters with the max buffs for reference right now is only Ingxia SS1, Seika SS1 and 2, and Tsukasa SS2. Lastly, Ingxia is important both in her S and SS style. Her SS style is one of the only styles in the game to be able to provide a multi-hit buff to an ally, which simply adds additional damage and also enables characters with low hit count to be more effective in bossing, such as Yurina, which I talked about before. However, while most will assume the SS style to be superior, Ing's S style is one of the few styles that has a passive at limit break 3 that provides 1 SP to all backline units while in the frontline. Funnily enough, only 2 S styles have this passive, which are Ingxia and Shiki. Because of this, S style Ingxia actually performs better than SS Ingxia if you generalize and get her SS skill on her S style, because increasing SP allows for lower turns in score challenge, leading to a higher score. Besides, her passive and super strong SS skill, she also has a defense down in her S style, which means that she can act as your general debuffer as well. While this being the case, you might wonder why even bother having another buffer, and that's simply because there's limited skill users and SP to be used. If you're using Ingxia to do buffs and debuffs, you'll end up taking a lot of SP, using more turns, and will generally reduce your potential score. At this point, with the last 2 slots left, you would assume that you would use them for specific elemental buffs. If you think that, you're not wrong, but also you're not entirely right. Currently in the game, there's only a small number of units capable of providing elemental skill enhancement and elemental defense down. For elemental defense down, there's only 1 per element. Isuzu for fire, Hisame for both light and dark, Bungo for ice, and Kozue for thunder. However, it's even worse for elemental attack up, as the only party-wide elemental attack up available is for dark on Shiki SS1 and fire from Ichiko SS1. Meanwhile, there are some DPS characters with self-elemental attack up. The Minase sisters SS1 EX skills, Misato SS1 EX skill, and Karo SS general skill, all of which are thunder except for Misato, which is dark. However, the issue with these elemental buffs is that they will be consumed on use, which means getting a maximum stack of 2 is impossible on these units, though having them as your main DPS would actually allow you to at least get 1 buff on. However, it's not completely doomed for elemental, as there are elemental fields, all of which provide a 50% buff and are set after using the corresponding SS EX skill, though there's no actual buff icon on your characters. Therefore, for elemental teams, alongside the 4 main roles which are pretty much fixed throughout all of them, the last 2 would be a field setter and elemental defense debuffer, which would provide the most damage without considering weaknesses. One of the main reasons that it's best to ignore weaknesses is that building multiple elemental teams for each element for every boss requires far too much and require a lot of characters, which is why it's best to decide on one element and stick to it, only changing out your DPS if there is a resistance, which I'll talk about in damage calculations later. However, on the occasion that the boss you're fighting actually has the right weaknesses, taking a fragile debuffer like Aina S or Mia S or SS will actually allow you to increase your damage greatly, more so than a field setter. However, if you are missing certain units from elemental teams, there's also another option that I would like to bring up that brings more utility and a buff that isn't talked about yet, and that honourable mention is Shiki S. I talked about Shiki S above with Ingxia and the backline additional passive, but Shiki is also one of the 2 characters which can provide party-wide charge, increasing skill attack and crit rate additionally besides the normal ones, stacking on top. Of course, some DPS characters already have the ability to self-charge, in which case Shiki is not really needed, but if you're having trouble finding a unit to slot into your team, Shiki is a good S character to put in. In the end, an ideal elemental team would look something like this, including all the elements that I've talked about above, though replacing some units with other units for double DPS when you're missing units would also be fine, though you would have to adapt your playstyle accordingly. However, there's still one team type that I haven't talked about yet, and that's null element or no element. Unlike elemental teams, many of the potential damage gains that can be obtained are lost, such as elemental skill enhancement, elemental defense down, fields, and element weaknesses. However, because most content doesn't actually have null resistance, it's an easy time to set up because it basically only requires the 4 main components of the elemental team: buffer, Ingxia, healer, and DPS, and the other 2 slots are basically not even required. One should be Shiki S for the extra charge buff and extra SP, but then there's still one more slot which you could use on a defender like Owl or a second healer to further stall. In essence, null element is the simplest to pull off as long as you have a null element DPS dealer, but it has a lower ceiling because of the fact that it loses out on multiple multipliers that are element locked. While I've talked a lot about buffs, debuffs and such, it all doesn't make much sense without looking into damage calculation. To put it simply, damage calculation follows this equation, which might seem daunting and annoying to understand at first, so I'll simplify it for everyone. This information has been researched by JP players, so it's accurate, but there's also multiple buffs and debuffs which don't currently apply to global, which I'll cross out for simplicity's sake. Now, with only everything left applicable to the global server, I'll slowly work my way down the damage calculation. First up is enhancements. I've already talked about it briefly before, but I'll go deeper into the numbers here. In actuality, most buffs in this game are actually only providing a 50 to 65% buff, while those skills which I've talked about above previously are actually 75 to 90%. In the end, these differences do add up, and therefore I recommend using a stronger skill enhancement buff compared to a weaker one if possible. Meanwhile, elemental enhancement is hard to get but ranges from 40 to 80%, following the same premise as normal skill enhancements, with EX skills giving a larger buff than general skill buffs. Charge is 20 to 30% and accessories is 15% max on earrings and 10% on rings, as well as a 10% if it's used during overdrive. Both skill enhancements for elemental and normal can be stacked up to 2 times, but charge is capped at 1. These buffs will not be consumed unless a skill is used. For defense down, you get a 20 to 30% increased damage for AoE defense down skills, while you get a 30 to 45% for single target. For elemental defense down, it's 30 to 45% for AoE and 45 to 60% for single. For defense down, the range values are fixed for all skills, so just make sure that you're using a single target defense down skill to get the maximum damage. These debuffs can also stack up to 2 times like buffs, however these only last 1 turn, so if you wish to stack these debuffs, you will have to make use of overdrive. Zones are flat 50% to its corresponding element and last indefinitely, though there's no buff indicator. DP and HP mods are either 30 or 50%, depending on the skill as well as conditions for the skill, as well as whether it's dealt to DP or HP. Totems are 16% per totem and only applies to units with totems and is stackable up to 10 for a max of 160. Multi-hit is a combination of potency and effect count. This is stackable twice and unlike skill damage, is used up on normal attacks as well. Critical hits are 150% damage multiplier and can only be increased by Seika's SS2 EX skill. Crit chance and crit damage increase are both consumed on normal attack and can be stacked twice like most buffs. Weaknesses and resists are a bit complicated to explain, but I'll explain it as easily as possible. On Seraph database, you can check the values of resistances and weaknesses on bosses. For example, if a boss is resistant to something, example light 75% in this case, that means that you'll only be dealing 25% of damage. In this example, the boss is also weak to pierce. as you can see from the Pierce 50, which means that you'll be doing 50% extra or 150% damage in total. These two values are then multiplied to each other to do the final calculation, which is 25% times 150% or 37.5%, which is actually a decrease in damage. So if DB has the values the other way around in a sense, so if it's resist, which is a blue arrow down, you minus it from the 100%, and if it's weakness, which is the red up arrow, you add that value instead. Mind's Eye and Fragile, which is a buff and debuff respectively, both increase damage by 35 to 50% as long as the enemy has the right weakness. However, as of right now, Mind's Eye is only able to be provided by Minori and she lacks much other utility besides that buff, considering that Fragile gives the same multiplier and is a lot easier to apply. Both are stackable up to 2 times, and Fragile is the same as Defense Down, lasting only 1 turn. Then there's Devastation Rate, which is just a flat multiplier increase after the DP of the enemy is broken, and last but not least is Gacha Central, which is simply RNG percentage. While most of the buffs and debuffs actually have a varied range, you can pretty much ignore the variance as long as you know that you're using the best possible buffs and debuffs that you can. Overthinking it would just make this more of a math game, and we all know that the best part about HBR is its story, so while knowing the damage calculation is helpful and good, just having a basic understanding and how they all stack is more important than the exact values. To show this, I'll be using different setups to show the importance of buffs and how they can affect the final damage. Last but not least, I'll be talking about some of the ways to optimize score challenge score. Before we start delving into damage calculations and strategies, you should properly equip the ideal gear before attempting on your squad. If you don't know what the ideal gear is, check out Tojo File's gear tab. A good baseline for what would be required for difficulty 91 and intensity 35, which is the max rewards that you can get, would be to have all 6-star gear for everything except necklaces and have them at a decent roll. When actually attempting score attack, one of the things to take note of is turn bonus and turn damage bonus. The less turns you take and the more damage you do in a single turn, the more bonuses you get. Personally speaking, higher turn damage is a lot harder to get a good score and it's more technically difficult as it requires max devastation and with the intensity challenges in place, usually makes the bosses scale as more turns are taken. Also note that while this method also works for other bosses, bosses outside of score attack are actually able to recover DP, which means that you can't build up devastation well and should follow the second method, which is also better for most players who are missing optimal units. This second method is a quick and fast attempt for a low turn run, quickly max buffing your DPS and getting 1 OD before stacking max debuffs and killing it as soon as possible. This will net slightly less score as turn bonuses are around 500 score per turn unused, while max turn damage is max turn damage divided by 100. However, if you're unable to hit super high damage due to lack of units and it not being your main element, this quick and fast nuke method would net you the better score with less thinking, while also providing you all the rewards that you can get. This method is also more suitable for normal bosses as they are generally weaker and faster clear times means that you can farm more as well. In the end, it really depends on what units you have and the boss's weaknesses to decide on which method suits you best. Nonetheless, both methods are able to net you the max rewards and clear all the missions, which is the most important point. During this video, I talk a lot about theoretical ideals and I also talk a lot about Seika and Ingxia a lot. I know that some people might not have a lot of the units as well as Seika and Ingxia, and this is where the benefit of knowing damage calculations can help. You can always replace the buffs with other buffs such as charge or fields, and also making use of different team compositions like having more than one DPS to suit the needs of what your team is able to pull off. In the end, while difficulty 91 and intensity 35 provide a higher score and all the rewards, you can still get most of the rewards from doing a lower difficulty and intensity and finding the sweet spot where you can get the best score and make the most from the score challenge. However, it is still recommended to try at higher intensities as each level of intensity provides a 0.01 times multiplier, which will greatly increase your score at higher difficulties, and some of them are actually relatively simple to clear. In the end, I hope that I was able to explain some of the more complicated things in HBR in a simpler form, and I wish everyone the best in their HBR journey. In the end, HBR is a single player game, so you can use whatever you have at your disposal and play however the way you want, even if it's not meta. I'd like to give huge credits to Tojo Files and Seraph Database yet again for having all this information readily available to the public, and the links to these resources are available in the description, which you should check out to help you in your HBR journey. So until the next review, goodbye.